Hello and welcome back to Histories Tech, and today we're going to begin looking at jet aircraft, and I figured what better place to look and talk about jet aircraft than let's talk about how the age of the jet began during World War II. Now, I won't be going too in-depth about these aircraft, however, I will be doing individual episodes over several of them, so look forward to that. When we talk about the origins of jet-powered flight, we've got to go all the way back to the beginning of powered flight with the Wright brothers. And since that insistence, there was the idea of using a jet efflux, the hot exhaust from some type of jet engine, to propel an aircraft. And in fact, the earliest claim of using this hot propelled gas to power an aircraft goes back to 1910 with the Cotonada 1910. However, in reality, what this was what's known as a ducted fan. Basically, it's a propeller with a wing wrapped around it to help control the airflow. Now, in the 1920s and 30s, we're going to see multiple methods being developed to create this jet-powered aircraft. And we're going to get things such as a motor jet, which uses a propeller engine to drive the jet engine. We're going to get the turboprop, which uses a high-speed turbo-gassed prop plane, which we see nowadays, the pulse jet, which is going to use a series of chambers detonated in sequence to provide power, and a rocket-powered aircraft, which I talked about in a previous video. Now, it wouldn't be until the 1930s that we see the jet engine we know today, and this is basically a layout of it. Basically, what you have on one end, you have the air intake where fresh air comes in. It gets compressed, usually through a series of blades, into a combustion chamber where it's mixed with fuel under high pressure, ignited, and comes out as the hot gas that we know as a jet engine. Now, interestingly enough, two men are credited with the creation of the jet engines in two different countries, roughly around the same time. Now, the first of these was an English engineer by the name of Frank Whittle, who actually began developing his ideas for faster engines in aircraft in the 1920s. And by the time he got to the 1930s, he actually looked at earlier developments in the 1920s, like the motor jet, and tried to figure out how you could make it more efficient, make it more powerful. And so while still in college, he managed to patent his first design in 1930, and then 7 years later, tested his design. While Whittle was trying to build his prototype, this man comes into the scene, Hans Vogt. He's a German physicist. He got his PhD in 1935, and while he was working on his PhD is when he came up with the idea for a propellerless engine. And he actually got to see Whittle's patent, but he absolutely hated it. He didn't like the design. He figured his design would be better, and so he came up with his own design for a jet engine, and his design ended up being put together and tested 6 months after Whittle. And so because of this, these gentlemen are considered the co-founders of the jet engine. Now, O'Hane had a much bigger advantage in that the fact that is, he worked for Heinkel Aircraft while he was developing this engine. So he handed over his design to Heinkel, and Heinkel put it in an aircraft, and we get the Heinkel HE-178, which becomes the first jet-powered aircraft. Now, this was basically a proof of concept idea, so the Germans actually kept this under wraps and kept it top secret, as this was just a development, a prototype phase. And so, basically, they were trying to figure out what were the issues, and one of the biggest issues they found was known as the creep, which is metal fatigues at high speed due to the temperatures caused by jet aircraft engines, which meant that these engines were prone to burnout, so they weren't feasible for anything other than testing. Now, the first public demonstration of a jet-powered aircraft goes to the Italians, which actually occurred 1 year to the day from the test flight of the Heinkel HE-178. And this was the Italian Caproni Campanini N1. Now, this was actually that motor jet design that I talked about earlier, which means that it had a piston engine in the front that helped power the jet engine in the rear. Thus, it's not a true jet engine. But because of this, eventually the Germans are going to reveal that they actually had a true jet-powered aircraft. At this point, due to the British entering World War II, they began the development of their own jet aircraft, the Gloucester E-28. While this wasn't a fighter aircraft and was a prototype and proof of concept for the British, the admittance by the Germans of their own jet aircraft program and them being ahead of everyone pushed the British to really go with Whittle's design and really start making jet aircraft. Now, this is immediately followed by the United States, who, taking two borrowed Whittle engines, start building their own and develop this aircraft, the Bell P-59 Aerocomet. And the American copied engine of Whittle's design would become the basis for all future American jet aircraft. The Soviet Union, not to be left out, actually began their own development program for a jet-powered aircraft. The Beranazov BI-1 would be the Soviet Union's attempt to research the similar technology. However, they ended up abandoning the jet-powered design and going with a rocket-powered one instead, and ended up abandoning the project. The age of the jet aircraft changed from prototype and proof of concept to real-world applications with this aircraft, the Messerschmitt Me-262. Not only is the Me-262 the world's first operational jet-powered fighter aircraft, but it's the only one to engage in air-to-air combat during World War II. This aircraft was proven to be an extremely effective fighter aircraft, shooting down as many as 542 Allied aircraft, and could potentially have been a game-changer for the German Air Force during World War II. However, it just came too late, and there were too few produced to do any significant damage. But this aircraft would have a major impact on Cold War development of jet-powered aircraft. The day after the 262 scored its first kill, the British introduced the Gloucester Meteor. Now, this aircraft would be the only Allied jet aircraft to see combat of any sort during World War II, but it was never allowed to go over German territory out of fear that it could be shot down and captured, and its technology reversed engineered to give the Germans an edge. Now, while the Gloucester Meteor was not as heavily armed or as fast as the 262, it did keep the Allies pushing forward for the development of more jet-powered aircraft. While this was going on, the Germans continued to develop more jet-powered aircraft. The Dorado AR-234 would become the world's first jet-powered bomber. The Germans would build the world's first single-seat fighter plane that had an ejection seat, the Heinkel HE-162, which is actually built as an emergency weapon, as a last-minute desperate weapon. It was designed to be easily flown by anybody in hopes that it could be rapidly built and deployed as a defensive measure against the Allies' incoming invasion. It would be one of the last mass-produced jet airplanes by the Germans during World War II. Now, towards the end of World War II, we're going to see a few aircraft get designed, developed, and even somewhat deployed, but never see any combat during World War II. One is going to be the American Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star, and this aircraft has an absolutely amazing story that I will tell in the future. However, while it was built in 1943 and did get deployed to Italy and the United Kingdom, it never saw any combat. Now, the second aircraft is the de Havilland Vampire, which would be the British's second fighter aircraft they ever built, and was actually very much an improvement over the Gloucester Meteor, and its development actually began in 1941. It would actually be approved for production in 1944. However, it didn't enter service until literally the start of 1946, months after the end of World War II, so it never got to enter service in World War II. The final aircraft I want to talk about that was developed during World War II but never saw any service is the Nakajima Kika. Now, this aircraft was actually built late in the war based on a group of Japanese military officials who had witnessed the development of the Me-262 and wanted Japan to develop its own jet fighter. Now, it went through nearly 3 years of development issues, basically around the engines, before they decided to basically just copy the 262's engine. And by mid-1945, they had it successfully figured out, and they flew the prototype on August 7th, 1945, which is the day after Hiroshima is bombed by the atomic bomb. And literally a few days later, the war ends, and the plan is abandoned for this aircraft, including the prototype and 24 production planes that were never finished. But there you have it, a look at the fighter jets in World War II. There's this common misconception that the Me-262 was the only jet fighter of World War II, but really, it was just in the middle of a race to build a jet aircraft and build a jet fighter. But that's it for today. Please keep an eye out for the future series I am going to be making about most of these aircraft and more.